We should be live. Yes, we are live now. I'm happy today to introduce you to the next seminar of our dialogues on ethology and behavioral ecology. And today there is a colleague from the Stazione Anton di Fano, and I will let a new colleague of ours, Alessandro Cini, that recently joined our ethology group at the University of Pisa, to introduce her, given that he is the one that recommended this talk. We will chat later after the seminar about the next seminars upcoming in May. And for the time being, I leave the podium to Alessandro and Lisa for today's seminar on. Alessandro?
Good afternoon, everybody. It is a real pleasure to introduce Lisa Locatello. She's a great evolutionary biologist, marine biologist, and Lisa started her career in Padova with her graduation in biological sciences, and she's now a researcher at the Fano Research Marine Center within the Stazione Zoologica Anton Dohrn. And Lisa is well known for her studies on fundamental evolutionary questions on sexual selection and reproduction in general. And Lisa specifically works on the evolution of female mate choice and male mating tactics, and especially in fishes. So it's a real pleasure. And she's a great evolutionary biologist, but she's also working on very timely topics in this era of the Anthropocene, such as the influence of climate change or pollution, many anthropogenic effects on animal reproductions in the marine environment. So she has an eye to the past evolution and an eye to the current times. And I really honestly say that I really enjoy reading her papers, in which you can find a very rigorous ethological approach, but also a deep evolutionary thinking. So I can't wait to see the seminar of today. And I'll leave the stage to Lisa.
So good morning, everybody. I don't know if you hear me. Are you hearing me? Yeah. So I share my screen. Just tell me if you see it, because I don't see anything more. The screen. Is everything okay?
Yes, now.
Okay,
yes,
perfect.
It is.
So, well, thank you, Alessandro, for this wonderful introduction. And thank you also, both the Alessandro, for this invitation to talk to this seminal series in ethology and behavioral ecology. It's a real pleasure. And as Alessandro told you, I'm talking today about one of my favorite topics. I mean, something that I've been studying since the beginning of my research career, that is female choice. And I will show you some specific example, in particular on benthic fishes, which have been for us specific and perfect models to study, to resolve some intriguing questions in sexual selection. And let me say that to talk to you about fishes today is a special occasion, since today it's the National Day of the Sea, la Giornata Nazionale del Mare. So it's a pleasure to discuss a bit of marine biology with you today. And so let's move to a brief introduction on, let's give you a framework of the presentation that we are doing today. And we are talking about sexual selection, of course, and sexual selection was introduced by Darwin to explain all those kinds of traits that he observed in nature, exaggerate variable traits that he observed and that he understood that were not useful for survival. And I mean, these traits had something in common. They were much more often expressed on males rather than on females, so they were sexually dimorphic. They had a cost, a high cost for survivorship, and they were used in the context of breeding. So what Darwin's idea was that, I mean, these traits evolve even if they do not convey any kind of advantage in terms of survivorship, as long as they confer an advantage to conquer the higher number of mates as possible. So all those traits that allow to conquer the other males in battle, or also to charm the female. But there is a difference, I mean, between males and females. So the higher number of mating partners increase the reproductive success of males much more than of females. Indeed, females produce few and large gametes, the eggs, while males produce billions and billions of sperm. And so it is much more difficult for the male gametes to find the female gametes. So the advantage of having much more partners is higher in males than in females, whose mating success does not mean increased reproductive success. For a female, it's even better to have few but high quality males. So which are the mechanisms through which sexual selection act? We have, therefore, male competition, so the competition between males to access the females, and the female choice. So males advertise for females and females to choose their mates. Of course, these two mechanisms can interact, and this occurs when, for example, males compete for resources that influence a female choice, like in the blackbirds that you see here, in which, I mean, males compete for better territories that are preferred by females. But let's talk about which are the reasons that drive the evolution of female choice. So which are the benefits associated to the preference for one male instead of another? So the answer is not one, is more than one. So we have some different hypotheses to explain the evolution of female mate choice. The first one is maybe the easiest explanation to demonstrate experimentally, and is the idea that female choice evolves because some male characteristics provide the female with information on immediate benefits, such as parental care, nuptial gifts, or, for example, territory defense, and so on. And this is something really common in insects. Here you have on the top left, for example, the scorpion flies, in which males give to the female a gift before mating, before copulating. Larger males provide larger gift, and females prefer larger males. This is a nutrient gift for females, so there is a clear advantage, a clear benefit to mate with larger males, giving larger gift. And there is also a direct advantage for the male, because while the female is eating, the male is copulating. So the larger the gift, the longer is the copulation, and the much more sperm transferred. The same occurs, for example, with the spermatophores in the Predates, and larger males provide larger spermatophores. Or it occurs also in birds, in penguins, in which the female admits to the nest the males who gives her the smoothest stones for the nest. But resourcing mean also parental cares, for example. And here we come to a small benthic fish. This is a sand gobies, in which the female prefer good fathers over the dominant male. This is an interesting study from Elizabeth Fosgreen from the north. And she demonstrated that the larger males in this species win in the male-male competition, but they are not the preferred males by the female, since the female prefers fathers that lead to a higher hatching success of the eggs, and not necessarily these are the bigger males. And well, resources, chiedo alla regia se può far partire il video gentilmente. So this is another example, the one that you're going to see in the video now. Maybe it's not going, I don't know, regia. I don't know. Well, we can go on anyway. So this is another example of parental cares conveyed as a resource. It's a puffer fish. And I don't know if you have ever seen a nest of a puffer fish. It's like a crop circle in the sea bottom, a very elaborated nest in which the male works for days to build up this nest and choose the material to build up the nest, with the coarser material on the outer zones to compact the nest, and adding shell fragments on the peaks of the nest. And these, allow the resiliency and give the nest stability to the bed surface where the eggs are laid. And these allow protection and optimize the ventilation of the eggs. And this kind of nest is implicated in the female choice for the preferred male. Let's go to a second hypothesis, less immediate to demonstrate for the evolution of female-male choice, is the good genes hypothesis. So the female choice might increase the genetic quality of the offspring for survival. What happens that you might choose a partner who convey better genes to the offspring, and the offspring will survive better in the future. This is the case, for example, of the stickleback. If you see, the stickleback male has a red throat here, red coloration on the throat during the reproductive season, and females prefer males with more intense red sexual coloration. And it has been demonstrated by Ian Barber that offspring of brighter stickleback males resist parasite infections better than the offspring of duller males. This has been done through in vitro fertilization experiments and using artificial infection of the offspring. Another hypothesis to explain the evolution of female choice is the so-called runaway sexual selection. So in this case, the preference of the female do not allow to have better quality offspring in terms of genes, but in terms of being sexy son, which is the sexy son hypothesis. Imagine that you have the male trait on one side, the female preference on the other, and both male traits and female preference have a genetic variation. Both the sexes possess the genes, but the female express the preference, the male express the trait. So the trait alleles increase in the population because they are preferred. The preference alleles increase because they are linked with the trait genes and hitchhike. So it's a kind of reinforcing process. Again, the stickleback can give you an example of this. In the stickleback, redder stickleback fathers produced redder son. And there is a positive genetic correlation between the female preference and the preferred male ornament. Last but not least, another explanation to explain the evolution of female-male choice is the sensory exploitation hypothesis. So it relies on the fact that females might have some general types of preferences and males might evolve traits that are preferred by these pre-existing preferences. But how to demonstrate this? It's not easy, because if you think to the reality, what you have is a species in which you see the traits and the preference. Which came first? It's a kind of egg-chicken problem. Who came first? So what you do to resolve this question, you look at the history, the evolutionary history of the traits and the preferences in different species, maybe in a phylogenetic tree. So if you look at this one on the top right, you have a species here without trait and without preference. Again, another one here. In the middle, you have a species which evolved trait and preference. It comes that the trait and preferences evolved together at this point of the tree. If you look at this one on the bottom right, here you have a species without trait and preference. Here you have the species with both trait and preference. Here you have the preference but not the trait. This means that the traits evolved here, the preferences evolved here, because it is in common between these two species. In this case, you are in the presence of a sensory exploitation, so the preferences evolved before the trait. Let's look at an example. The swordtail fish. This is a great example, and Alexandra Basolo, through a series of studies, demonstrated clearly that in the swordtail fish, the female preference predates the evolution of the sword. So it's a case of sensory exploitation. How did she demonstrate this? First of all, she demonstrated that in this species, Xiphophorus elleri, having the sword tail, the trait is present, of course, and there is female choice based on the variation in the trait. So females prefer the larger sword-tail fish. In the absence of male trait is the ancestral state within a clade. So she did a phylogenetic analysis, and at the origin, this family was without the sword. In a species having the primitive state, so Xiphophorus maculatus here, they do not have the sword, but the female prefer fishes with the sword, implanted chirurgically, surgically, and also if they do not have the trait in their family. This means that the preference predates the evolution of the trait, and so we are in presence of a sensory exploitation. But the situation is even a bit much more complex than this, because the recent studies have demonstrated that in reality, female choice is much more devoted to multiple cues, multiple male cues that may itself exploit different components of a same modality, such as, for example, here you see a guppy with different colors. Or multiple cues in male choice may also involve different modalities, such as, for example, a visual trait together with sounds, or a visual trait together with chemical stimuli, and so on. So it is even in some way much more complicated to understand how the evolution and the persistence of female choice for multiple traits evolved. And of course, one important step when trying to demonstrate the evolution of female choice for multiple cues is to clearly understand which is the signal content. So what is each signal signaling? What is each cue signaling to the female? Which kind of benefit? And we had a fantastic species to work on this. So to work on the evolution of female choice for multiple male traits. That is the peacock blenny, the Salaria pavo. So this is a sexually dimorphic species. And if you see here, during the breeding season, the male develops a yellow head crest like this, that is really evident during the breeding season, only in males. And they have also a pair of anal glands here that are derived from a modification of the anal fin that the male rubs on the ceiling of the nest during spawning. Male perform parental cares until egg hatching, and they make nests inside these empty shells of bivalves, like ostriche or mussels, and they care the eggs until hatching. So we have done a lot of work to understand how much and which are the preferred traits in female-male choice. We have done this through a huge set of experiments in captivity, but with a particular interesting mode of action method, that it's the use of artificial dummies. So instead of using natural males, we use these dummies that perfectly resemble the natural males of the peacock blenny, but have a great advantage because they allow you to change the trait of interest, so the trait that you can manipulate to understand the choice. That is, for example, the size of the head crest, the color of the head crest, and then the size of the anal gland. And so this allowed us to understand which are the preferred trait by females. So let's look at the results briefly. We now know that peacock blenny females prefer large crest over the small ones and a large anal glands over the small ones. But then we can go further. We can have a look at what happens with the color of the head crest. So the females prefer larger yellow patch on the crest and more colored yellow crest, so with a high color intensity. If you put together the size of the yellow patch and the intensity of the color, the large yellow is preferred over the intensity. And so we know which are the preferred traits. We need to know which are the benefits associated with these traits. And we have done, again, a huge amount of work to understand what the cues are signaling. Fertility in terms of number and sperm quality, or maybe the ability in parental cares of the male, or maybe his health status. You don't have to forget that yellow and orange coloration in fish, but also in birds, are expression of the intake of carotenoids, and so they are a sign of good health. And to understand all this, so all the benefit associated to the male traits, we integrated lots of different analyses from behavioral stuff, also in the field, so by scuba diving, with physiological analysis on sperm and immunochallenge experiments and microbial tests. And which are the results? I go straight to the result. I don't want to go into the detail of each studies, but at the end, we know that the male side is for sure is signaling to the female the fertility ability, because larger males produce more sperm. Then we have the head crest. The size of the head crest is again signaling fertility to the female, because larger head crests are correlated with high fertility, but also signal the long-term condition of the male. Male with bigger crests are in better condition. They are a negative signal of the ability of male in performing parental cares. The color of the head crest again signals the condition of the male as the current health status. Then we have the anal glands that are a positive signal of the efficiency of males in performing parental cares. Indeed, they produce antimicrobials that protect the eggs, and the quantity of the secretion is proportional to the gland size. And we have seen that females prefer males with larger anal glands. So in Salaria pavo, we have two different signals, the male size and the size of the head crest, that works as a backup signals. So they are both giving information on male fertility. So maybe this is a way to enhance the information to the female. But we also have different information on the same trait, because, for example, the head crest color signal both the long-term and the current condition. So we have backup signals and multiple messages to the females. Of course, we don't know yet if there are any kind of genetic benefits conveyed by these signals, but this might be a future direction. And this species has been really intriguing to go further and to understand the mechanism, the cognitive mechanisms that are underlined to the female choice. In particular, this has been a great species to delve into the plasticity in female preference and into the idea that the preference of a female might change depending on the context and depending on how a male is perceived in that context. So if you see here, this is the same size peacock, but here it seems larger than here, depending on the other males he has around. So we worked a lot in plasticity in the female presence around the context. But let's go back to a bit of theory to explain you better this experiment. So traditionally, decision-making processes were explained by the so-called theories of economics. So what is a rational decision in a theory of economics? It's a decision that maximizes some utility. That could be an economic gain or a satisfaction. It is very straightforward. This is a rational economic decision. So to be rational in this sense, a decision must adhere to two specific rules: the rules of transitivity and the rules of regularity. Nothing too difficult. It's something that you have seen at the school. So if A is preferred over B and B is preferred over C, then A should be preferred over C. If A is preferred over B in the absence of C, that should be the same in presence of C. A should be preferred over B. Taken together, all this is called the independence from irrelevant alternatives, that in this graph here is the C. So the minimum alternative compared to the other two. So in a rational decision process, in an absolute process, thanks to the theory of economics, the choice should be independent from the addition of an inferior alternatives. But I mean, it's not always the case. And a first study who demonstrate that this is not always the case was this one made when The Economist decided to put the first online subscription possibility. So a group of students from the MIT were interviewed and they were asked to choose between among three options. So an online subscription for $59, a print subscription for $125, and the possibility of a print plus the online subscription, again for $125. So they gave an answer, and this is the answer. The large majority of students preferred the print plus online subscription. None of them, of course, choose the intermediate option here because it's not convenient. It's at the same price of this, but with something less. Then the study was repeated and the interview was made again without this option. So what you would expect is that since that option didn't receive any preference, the choice shouldn't change too much. But if you look at the result, it did change actually. So you have a totally reversed preference. In the absence of the intermediate option, what happens is that the large majority of students choose this option, the online subscription, really much more economic than this one. So something is changing if you consider the presence or the absence of the inferior alternative. And suppose that this occurs, it is a really exploited solution by the sellers. So I saw you a decoy effect in action in a marketplace. So let's imagine that you have to buy a bottle of wine. Well, you can choose between a Tavernello, only €5, or you have another option, that is a Brunello di Montalcino at €30. Of course, in this situation, this one maybe seems too expensive. But if I add you another option, an inferior option, a decoy, that could be a Chianti for €50, then this bottle here of Brunello di Montalcino maybe seems of a much more reasonable price. So you see that the addition of another alternative, an inferior alternative, in this case, this is not inferior for the quality, but it's inferior for the price because it costs a lot more. So the situation, your preference might change. And this is a decoy effect in action. And as I told you, this is a lot used in the market to sell you everything. And so our question was, what happens to the female choice? I mean, female might be in some way a market. I mean, females has to choose in nature between some different options. Do they act in a rational way, rational in the economic sense? So do they prefer an absolute perfect choice? or maybe the choice might be irrational, as it often happens in the market, in the economic market. And so what did we do? We made a set of not so complicated. If I explain, you just follow me. Of experiment using two different traits. So two preferred traits, two traits that we already know that are preferred by the female. So the yellow spot area on the head crest and the body size. So each female, at the end, we got 25 females. Each female was exposed at 3 different treatments. So the first one was a binary choice. She was asked to choose between a very yellow male here and a small one, and a duller one, but a big one here. So this was the yellow male, the more yellow, and this was the bigger one. And so she was asked to choose between these two. Then the same female had to choose in a trinary context. So we still have the very yellow male and the very big one, but we have a decoy that is close to the yellow. So it is smaller in size than the two competitors, and it is between the two in the yellow spot, very close to the yellow. So this is the yellow decoy. Then the same female had to choose also in another trinary option with the size decoy. So very similar to the other competitor, the bigger male. This one, this decoy, was duller than the two in terms of yellow and close in size to this one. What should we expect? If the female is acting in a rational choice, in a rational way, in the economic sense, the choice should be independent from the presence of the decoy. So the original preference that you see here in the binary choice should remain the same. If the choice is irrational, the preference for one of the two competitors should increase in presence of the more similar decoy. So the preference for yellow should increase here. The preference for size should increase here. Again, we did an experiment, a choice experiment with the dummies, and what we saw was that. So a first interesting result, a positive result with respect to our hypothesis. So only 2 out of the 25 females choose the same male in sequential trials. The trials was randomly distributed to avoid any kind of bias due to the order of presentation. So this is a good news, because this means that they are changing their preference. So something is changing from the binary option to the presence of the decoy. And looking at this graph, the change is going in the direction that we might expect, because this is the relative preference for the yellow spot area. The opposite is the preference for the size, and the preference for the yellow increased in the presence of the more similar decoy and decreased in presence of the less similar decoy. This means that at the opposite, this preference increased in the presence of the similar decoy. But I mean, this is not statistically significant. So, I mean, the direction is the right one, but it's not significant. Looking at the data and not satisfied completely, we wonder something. Look at this. If I show here this result, what you see is that in the binary choice, the choice is not straight for one trait or the other. There is a strong bias in individual preference in the binary choice. That means that half of the females prefer the more yellow male and half of the females prefer the larger one. So the preference is not straight for one character, for one trait over the other. In this situation, what you see here might have been masked by the fact that you are distributing the initial preference into different group of females. So what we did, what the idea that we have, was to split the results into subgroups. Let's look at how. So here you still have the preference, the relative preference for the yellow spot, And we have a size group females, so a group of females that did not prefer the yellow, but preferred the larger males, so the size. And here we are. In the binary choice, they have just the 20% of preference for the yellow. On the other side, we have the yellow females, so a group of females that preferred the yellow, and so here the preference is height, versus the size. When we add the decoy, what happens? When we add the decoy for the yellow, we see that the relative preference for the yellow increased with the addition of the decoy in the size females. So in the females that initially did not prefer the yellow. When we add the decoy for size, the relative preference for the yellow decreased with the addition of the decoy for size. And of course, at the opposite, the relative preference for size increased. So what happens? Happens that, of course, there is a violation of the rules that we have seen before. So it's clear that the female in the peacock blenny is making a kind of non-rational, of irrational choice. Although this happens only in a specific situation, so when the decoy exhibits the intermediate expression of the trait that initially was not preferred. So not in general, but only if the initial trait was not preferred. If we look at the more similar decoy, if you remember, our expectation was that in presence of the more similar decoy, the preference should increase, unless it doesn't significantly. So it remains unchanged. We observed this, and we also observed that females spend a large proportion of their time with the decoy. So something is masked here. What's happening? So there are two possible explanations in our opinion. So first is that if this is the trait already a lot preferred from the beginning, there is a kind of ceiling effect. So if you give to that trait a preference of 80%, you can go over than that. So there is a ceiling effect. Another explanation might lie in the way in which animals compare quantities. So I would like to make a game with you. I can't have your answer, but I try to imagine it. So let's say that I show you these two groups of spots, one on the right and one on the left, and I ask you which is the more numerous one. I have to answer for you. So if I look at this, the more numerous one for me is on the left. The absolute difference between the two groups is 1. So you have 1 spot more on the left. The proportional difference between the two groups is 20%. So the left group has the 20% of spot more than the right one. What happens if I increase the quantity in the groups? So I give you this, and I again ask you which is the more numerous one. Again, I give you the answer. The absolute difference is 1, again, between the two groups. So the absolute difference is the same, but the proportional difference between the two groups is lower. If I show you a very numerous comparison like this, it's much more difficult for you to tell me which is the much more numerous group than the other. The difference is again 1, so you have 1 more spot on the left compared to the right. But the proportional difference between the two groups is really, really small. So your ability to perceive the difference between the two groups depends on the proportional difference between the groups. This is the so-called Weber's law. That means that the minimum difference between two quantities for discrimination needs to be greater when stimulus quantity is high compared to when it is low. And this is maybe what happened with the decoy in the peacock blenny. So the law of perception might have influenced the preference when the decoy was really similar to the preferred focal trait, and both the focal trait and the decoy were very high quantity stimuli. They were the maximum, almost the maximum expression of the trait. So here you have a clear explanation of the results. But let's go back to the general results. So what we have seen is that, of course, in the peacock blenny, the male attractiveness depends on the context. Look at this male, the size is the same, but can be perceived differently with respect to the other males around. Is this choice really irrational? I mean, it's irrational in the economics sense, but maybe not in the context sense. Imagine a lacking group, so many males together, and a female that needs to sample many males in a short time. It would be much more difficult to find a male that go over a threshold value than to compare all the current males. It might be much more fast, less time consuming to compare different males and make a comparative choice rather than a rational absolute one. So this might be advantage in dynamic and complex social context. So the step that we have done after this was to have a look at the sampling strategies that females apply to compare these males. Traditionally, there are two strategies, two female sample strategies, the sequential one and the best of n. So the best of n strategies is the one that you expected is used by a female who is comparing different males in a group of males. So she needs the ability to return to previous encountered male to remember the quality and the location of the male. So complex cognitive abilities. And I mean, the males does not need an absolute greater values, and the values of the males that she chooses at the end does not influence the sampling strategy. So the female is sampling all the male and remembering where is the preferred one. So to test which female sample strategies females of the peacock blenny are using, we did a very simple experiment in this kind of large open door tanks in which we put 7 males at times, different for their attractiveness, and we let the female to go around and spend the time with the different males for more than 1 hour. And we try to understand which was the sampling strategy of the female towards 7 different males. A group of 3 females was led to choose between the same 7 different males in 9 different trials. So what we saw at the end was that only few females, the large majority of females, 27, visited the preferred male a number of times significantly higher than 1. The preferred one was not the last male visited. The quality of the male did not influence the female sampling strategy because she went on visiting other males also if the preferred one at the end was the higher quality males. And the very first visit to the preferred male did not last significantly more than all the other visits. That means that females of the peacock blenny are using the best of n sampling strategies. That is what we expect in the case of a comparative, non-absolute, irrational choice. But we had a by-side result in this experiment that is very interesting for our future direction. So as I showed you before for the comparative choice experiments, the preference of the females is not directed to one character over the other. We have a dimorphic response in the choice. Some females prefer the yellow males, some prefer the big size. Here we see that there is a non-coincident preference among the 3 females tested for each group of males. So if you let 3 females to visit the same group of 7 males, you do not have the same response each time. So there is a polymorphism in the female choice. And what happens is that larger females are the ones who choose the most attractive males. We did another step. So remember this by-side effect result because it come up at the end. We did another step. So what happens for the males? What does the males, which is the sampling strategy of the males when choosing the nest, given that the females are applying this kind of comparative choice? What is convenient for a male to do? Where should he nest? I mean, there are two choices. He could stay close to a more sexy friend, a more sexy neighbor, in the hope of getting some females that the sexy male get to the nest. Or he might choose to nest close to a less attractive friend, a less attractive neighbor, to appear much more attractive himself to the females. Of course, if the female is doing that kind of comparative choice, we would expect that a male choose to nest close to a less attractive neighbors. So we did an experiment again in these large open air tanks, in which we put a focal male and had a look where he was nesting, if close to a more sexy stimulus, a more sexy neighbor, or close to, let's say, a duller, a less sexy friend. We just check how was the choice for the nest of a focal male. So we did 20 triplets of one focal male and 2 stimulus. Of course, males were all previously scored for their attractiveness, looking at the total length and at the crest size, and was assigned as more or less attractive than the focal. So we had a triplet having an intermediate attractive male and 2 focals, more attractive or really dull male. And then we made a 2 days experiment in which we preliminarily test the female preference for the stimulus. So to be sure that the triplets that we were building were realistic. And then we tested the focal male nest choice. And what we saw was really clear. So the focal male chose to nest close to the less attractive neighbors. So he chose a solution, a context solution, in which he appeared much more attractive to the females. And so we now know that male and female strategies are in some way working in concert to maintain a plasticity both in the choice and in the variability of traits. So remember what I said you before. We were talking about the polymorphism in female choice as a byproduct, a by-result of the other experiments. So what we saw was that not all the females preferred the same male, and that larger females were choosing the most attractive males. So this gave us a really, base for future studies to understand why larger females are choosing the most attractive males and not the smaller ones. Remember that in fish and in the peacock blenny, we know that the larger females are the older females, the smaller are the younger. And so we are wondering if the individual variation in choice is a matter of age-related ability in the resolution of signals. So we are going back in the process to understand if what we see has a reason in the capacity of the resolution of signals by the females. Theoretically, what we expect is that there is an accurate and equivalent signals detection across individuals. But in reality, this is not always true, because there is a complexity of the physiology of the females and an environmental variability that may cause individual difference in the perception of the signals and in its processing. So if we think to fish, what we see is that when fish age and become larger and huge, there is an anatomic remodeling of the sensory system. So eyes become larger. The area of the retina increases, so the number of photoreceptors increase. there are new retinal ganglion cells that are added, and they also increase in the size of their dendritic harbors. So what we might imagine is that the same visual world as a fish age is imaged on a larger retina with more retinal ganglion cells. So it might be that older females increase the resolution of the visual system with growth. So now our question is there any age-related different abilities in the perceptual signals? Are these sensory abilities a good drivers of the phenotypic variability that we observe in the behavior of choice? Is there any implication for the evolution of mate choice strategy? Let's say that a younger female has a lower sensory perception ability. She might rely on female mate copying strategy to copy what the older one do to mate. So we plan to delve into this with behavioral experiments to understand if there is a different female ability to resolve the visual signals, both in the mating and in non-mating context, so to measure also the visual acuity by behavioral experiments, and to test the implications for female copying. We also plan to do some morphological analysis to measure the density of photoreceptor and retinal ganglion cells in different age females. And maybe, who knows, I hope to do some gene expression analysis on the opsin genes. In general, what we would like to have is a more deepened understanding on the complex and cognitive and neurobiological processes that underlies the mate choice. We have done already two steps in this, and I want to show you just the preliminary results that we have. So this has been done by Livia Pinzoni. She's now a PhD student at the University of Padova. Here she was undergraduate student, and she did this wonderful experiment. She made two different experimental setups with different females in which they were asked to choose between two males. In one case, in the setup one, the two males were very similar in the yellow spot at the head crest. In the other one, the difference between the crest was much more evident, 60% of yellow versus 10%. So two experimental setups. In each experimental setup, she had different size class females, large, older females, and small, younger females. So she did the first step of choice. So the female first was allowed to choose between two different males, with a small difference in the yellow spot area or with a large difference. And this is the first step of the choice. Then what did Livia do? She put a model female in a second step of the choice of the same female close to the initially non-preferred male to stimulate a kind of female copying. So let's say that this female at the beginning in the binary choice chose this preferred male. Then she was forced to imagine that this female instead preferred this one. So she was allowed to look at the model for some time, and she was asked to make again the initial choice with the question, is she still preferring this one, or is he changing the preference towards the most preferred one by the model? And does this change depend on the age of the female and on the difference in the expression of the trait between the two males? So here I showed you some preliminary results. So here you have the large old females, here you have the small ones. If you look at the large females, they are always able to discriminate the more yellow male, to choose the more yellow male, even when they are in presence of two males that have a small difference in the stimulus. The young females are not so able, so they have some difficulty especially to discriminate among the males when the difference in the stimuli is very low. So the small females have some lower abilities in perceiving the male signals. What happens after the possibility to look at the model female after coping? Also, the small females acquire the possibility to discriminate the best males because they are forced to copy a model females. So there is a consequence of the low ability, the low initial ability of the females on their future sample strategy. So now we know that we can go on making some new experiments to understand if there is a limit in the perception of signals also in non-sexual context, to understand how much this might be related to the experience of the sexual rewards or really to the visual acuity of the females. And when we will go on also with the rest, so the density of the photoreceptors and the gene expression. But now Livia is doing also something more on female choice, and she's dedicating her PhD study on postcopulatory female choice. So on what I told you at the beginning, so the idea that Darwin didn't recognize that female are promiscuous, so they mate with more males, and this opened the way to sexual selection to go after the mating. So we have after the mating two mechanisms that are the analogous of what happens before matings. The male-male competition becomes the competition between the ejaculates over the fertilization of a given group of eggs. And female choice becomes the possibility that female bias the fertilization towards the sperm of a specific males. Indeed, if females mate with multiple males, then there might be a competition after the mating going on. And Livia is doing a lot on this using another small benthic fish species that is a goby, the grass goby, who nest inside, underneath the seagrass roots. And you see here, he makes these large chambers. And inside the chamber, you have the territorial male and the female, and some sneakers that might enter inside the nest and release the sperm to steal the fertilization during the territorial male spawning. And of course, the female is releasing her ovarian fluid close to the territorial male, but not so close for the sneaker. What Livia is seeing in her experiments is that the female reproductive fluid, the ovarian fluid, differently affects the sperm of males adopting alternative tactics. And this is based on the concentration of the ovarian fluid, so on the proximity of the male when he is releasing the sperm. But of course, the picture is much more complicated than this, and the experiment is really a nice experiment. I don't want to go into more details, but I really suggest you to come to Evoluzione 2022. It's the Congress of the Italian Society for Evolutionary Biology that will be in Ancona in September. And Livia will present the result of this experiment at the Congress. So if you have the curiosity to know much more about the grass goby and the cryptic female choice, I suggest you to come. And so I've finished my presentation. Of course, this is not my the work of myself alone, but I mean, lots of people have collaborated to do these studies, and I want to thank them all, and especially the lab of Mariella Rasotto in Padova, where I was based before coming to Stazione Zoologica, and of course, I want to thank the fundings coming from the University of Padova and Cariparo, and now from Stazione Zoologica Anton Dorn, that I hope will let me to go on this fantastic field, I think, of female choice. And I thank you all for your attention, and I'm ready if you have any curiosity or question.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
It has been really fascinating and really, really interesting. I think we can open to questions now. I don't know if anybody has a question. Let me check on the commentaries here. So in the meanwhile,
I have a couple of questions if no one has. Okay.
Yeah, okay.
You let me know.
Yeah, go ahead, Alex.
Okay. So first of all, I feel totally distressed by this sexual discrimination. And I tell
Sorry.
you why. Because males look like they are passive objects of female choice. Okay. In this specific, I'm joking. But my question is actually related to this. So, are able in these species or other species that you know of choosing whom are they chosen from? So let me rephrase it.
I missed a part of the question, I think, for some audio problems.
Okay.
So if you
So
can repeat.
do males have the ability to choose whom they are chosen from? They are selected from. I make you an example. When I am smaller, I may go for the yellow. And so I try to seduce, let me use this inappropriate term, females that are more likely choosing yellow over size. When I'm bigger, I might go for larger females that, according to what you say, choose preferentially more attractive males, meaning larger males. So did you see any differential behavior in these males?
So what I can say, yeah, first of all, of course, I've been much more concentrated on the female choice part, but I want to, I have to clear that, of course, this is not so strict in the species. I mean, you have many species in which you have female-female competition for males and male choice. This is not rare. I mean, you have species in fish in which sex roles are completely reversed. Such as, for example, the seahorses, but also in species in which sex roles are not reversed totally, you can have female-female competition. And blennies are, in this sense, a good example because, for example, what I saw in nature is that, I mean, you have to imagine that you have many females around the nest, not just one choosing among nests. So it's a kind of complex social environment. And so females compete to access to the nest. There is a female competition. And in some species, not in the peacock blenny, but in the sphinx blenny, for example, the nests are very tiny with a small opening. The female compete to access to the nest, and it's the male at the end choosing to enter to the bigger female. Because in fish, for females, bigger means more fecund, more eggs. And so there might be male choice. So specifically in relation to what you asked me, so to this species, I don't know. But I mean, it would be interesting to know. What I did in a first attempt was to map a natural site in the field and try to monitor exactly what the males are doing. But that's not easy because you have to imagine that in the field, it's difficult to keep a constant monitoring on the site for all the season. And sometimes you can't access to the site, so the situation changes. It's a bit difficult, but it would be great to have a kind of mesocosm in which to put the male and maybe mark them and try to see what they do. That would be great. So I do not exclude what you say. I mean, they are not passive. They're not passive, and also in the sense that if you see, they decide where to nest. And this is
because
the
if
first.
that is the case, you have to assume that they have the ability to recognize their attributes. Somehow they have there is a mechanism that somehow triggers different behaviors based on their own qualities. That would be very interesting.
Yeah, that would be interesting. And in this case, what I imagine is that they choose to nest between, close to one very sexy male or a not sexy one. So they are comparing also the stimuli one with the other. So they have cognitive abilities, I guess. So, yeah. So I just show you the female perspective.
So, because that doesn't mean that if I choose to to nest closer to a less sexy male, it doesn't mean that I know how much I am sexy.
Yeah. Depends.
Oh,
yeah. But I mean,
that's a slight, but mechanistically
but I
speaking.
don't know. Yeah.
Oh,
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. I mean, I should find a way to test that. But of course, you have the proof through the female choice, right? Because if you nest close to the duller male and then the female come often to you, that's a good choice. So you have the proof through the female choice. But then, I don't know which is the mechanism for the male. That should be interesting to test. Not easy, but...
No, it's easy to think about it. It's not easy to prove it. And I am really fascinated by these kind of experiments, by the way. So that follows the second question, that is about somehow you mentioned that there is a switch in preference in females as soon as they grow older and bigger in size, they change their selection and they are more prone to select the bigger males. I wonder if there any if it is possible to test for experience. Let me rephrase it. So if I have a similar size female, but one that has never mated, and the one that has mated multiple times, if you expect the same kind of selection at the same size and age.
This is the tricky point. I mean, it has been done in guppies, because in guppies you have virgin females, and so you can establish if that one is the first mate or not. I can't do that with the peacock blenny, because when they come from the field, I don't know if they are virgin or not. You know, so
and can't you breed them in the mesocosmos?
No, not. I mean, I don't have a mesocosmo, and I mean they are long living. I mean, they live 5 years, so they're not easy to breed. The blenny, I mean, they are easy to breed. I mean, to make them mating, but then it's difficult for me to rear them until the sexual maturity. Anyway, what I'm trying to do, since I can't disentangle directly from the experience with virgin females, I'm trying to test the visual acuity also in non-sexual context, to see if the behavioral visual acuity is limited to the sexual context, and so maybe to the experience related to the benefits that you can get in that context. Or it might be driven by, in the case I show you, by some morphological steps. Okay, so what I'm trying to do is to make this kind of visual acuity behavioral test, in which you simply show to the female different drawings with different, let's say vertical or horizontal bars at different distances, and you give her rewards to the female if she chooses, let's say, the right one. And so you can measure a kind of behavioral visual acuity in non-sexual context. So this is what I'm trying to do, to go further and to disentangle a bit from the experience.
Alessandro, may I keep going, because this is really fascinating for me? Okay.
Yeah, don't worry. Go.
So my other question is related to the fact that I don't know enough about these species. So this is more a general question, like what is the extra pair paternity? Do we know how many of the eggs are fertilized by other males, other than the one that is officially defending the nest?
I have to say you something interesting on this species. So in the population I monitored in the Lagoon of Venice for many years and in the Adriatic Sea, I don't have sneaker males. I don't have paternity data on natural nests, but I've never seen in the field sneaker males trying to get inside the nest, and so to steal paternity. I don't have paternity data. But in another population, in some Portuguese researchers, some Portuguese guys, says that they have sneaker males, so they have extra pair paternity. I don't know if they have paternity data, but at least there is the possibility for extra pair paternity. I've never seen a sneaker male in the field in the population I monitored for years. And I guess that this depends on the fact that in this population I have, nests are many. I mean, there is a huge abundance of nests. So the competition for nests might be not so high. And so also the smaller ones, the smaller males, nests. I find males of all ages defending a nest in the field, from small males at the first year to the large at the third year. So I'm not sure that I don't have paternity data, but I'm not sure that there is a strong extra pair paternity in this nest.
So you're saying that might not be such a benefit from that.
Yeah. I don't know. I've never seen a sneaky male in the field.
So you don't really know
I've
whether
seen in
this
other
is
species.
So you don't really know whether this is a promiscuous. It's a promiscuous.
It's
or
promiscuous
polyandric.
I don't know. I mean, it depends on the population. I mean, in my population, it is polyandrous in the sense that you find eggs from different females inside a nest. And you can say that by measuring the stage of the development. And so you see that they have been deposited from different females at different times. I've never seen multiple males competing inside the same nest. So I can say you that. Then it's different in other population, as the Portuguese guys say. In these species, then blennies are, I mean, there is a variety
in Venice, in the Venice Lagoon, when you go in the nest, how often you find the male defending? You find the male there?
I mean, always. They get the nest at the beginning. They get the nest at the beginning of the season. You mean at the beginning of the season, they come and go a bit because they are deciding where to go and where to nest. Then when they establish, they are quite stable. I mean, they can move, they can change, but not too much. This is another thing that I would like to see, to mark them and to see how they move during the season and when the season proceeds. So I don't know that, but I mean, they're always seen. We have marked some of them to do that work on parental cares, and they were always there. So they're quite stable.
Okay, so I cannot see any other question, so I might start with my own questions. I have many of them. So the first one follows on what Alessandro was saying before. So the levels of variability in female choice, and you were talking about age, and Alessandro was talking about experience. And I'm wondering, what about personality? There's a constancy in female choice. I guess it's quite, I mean, if you are not citing that, probably you didn't have time enough so far to do that. But no, can you elaborate on that? Because my idea is that probably, I mean, can we talk about more rational and more irrational females?
I don't know.
Possible? Ever found in any fish? Or
this is something I would like to do, of course.
He's speaking out of his experience.
No, but this is in the plan, Ale. This is in the plan because I mean, it could also change. You mentioned at the beginning the idea, the fact that I'm also working on climate change, and so I'm also interested in the idea that the environmental variability might influence the strategies of choice. Sure. So I would say that it is such a plastic system that why not? And I mean, personality is really a huge, an important task. So I can't tell you that up to now because I'm not able to follow the same female in many days and to repeat the experiment. So imagine that the one that I show you on comparative choice, a female was asked to choose in 3 different contexts. And she's doing that with a dummy. And so she has to repeat the choice. And then if you go on and on, she becomes, as she see that she's choosing something, but she cannot mate, at the end she gives up. And so you can't force the system over a certain level. Okay, again, I would like to have mesocosms or things like that to see what happens. I mean, it's not easy to do that in captivity, but it's in the plan.
And can you, I didn't get how much, to what extent you can manipulate female status, for example, nutritional status, or you can, I don't know, it's not ethical, but just to speak.
I've never done. The idea I had was to give the maximum nutritional status to all of them, to put them in the situation of being as much comfortable as possible. But of course, if you vary their nutritional status, or another thing that you might expect is influencing is the hormonal status of the female, something might change, I don't know. So I have all the blood samples of the females that I tested in the comparative studies, and I have in the plan the hormone analysis to see see if something in the status of the female is related to the choice. I expect it might be. So again,
you might be more irrational if you are,
I don't know.
Life or at the end
I don't know. The idea I had was to put them in the best situation as possible. So food, everything comfortable and so on, natural situation with but I mean, it would be interesting to see what happens when the situation changes. And also maybe when the context of, well, the number of mates, the size of the group, the time they have to, the distance between males. So as I told you, if you have all the males there, you can compare them and it's easier. What about if you have to search for the males in different situations, maybe due to habitat fragmentation or so on? So, I mean, it's an open question in many directions.
Yeah, it's also a matter of costs, as you are saying.
Yes, it's a balance between costs and benefits, So,
And linking to this idea of the costs, I didn't get the cost for the males in the traits of the males. So being yellow or being big, okay, I might understand it's a developmental cost, but being yellow is the same. Do we know something about the cost of being yellow or the cost of the glands?
Yeah, I know that. Yeah, I know that being yellow means that you have to eat a lot of carotenoids. Okay, so what I did was an immunochallenge experiment in which I injected an antigen stimulating the immunoresponse of the male. And what I saw was that when they are infected, they transfer the carotenoids from the yellow crest to the immunoresponse. And so when they were fighting against the infection, they were duller.
Okay.
And so there's a huge cost to maintain the colors because the carotenoids might be devoted to other functions in your body, such as the immunoresponse. And what I know is that the more yellow males, the bright males, better respond to the infection than the dull males, so they are in better long-term condition. Okay, so there is a cost to be yellow. So it's an honest signal in that sense. It's an honest signal.
And I follow on with
there is a question. I think,
I didn't see it.
Alessandro from Paolo Luschi. I copy and paste it for you guys. So Paolo Luschi, he was not able to write on the YouTube channel, so he has written within our WhatsApp.
Okay, I see.
In the decoy experiment, how could you compare the response of females in the first binary test with that of the other tests? I mean, in the first case, she had to choose between two males. Oh, that's it.
Yeah.
2 males. In the other cases, among three males.
Yeah, I mean, these are 3 different contexts. So I expect that the context is different. I mean, of course, maybe, you know, I know what he means. Well, I didn't say that I measured the relative preference. So I measured both the relative and the absolute preference. So in the case of the relative preference, I measured the preference for A over B, so for yellow over size. And in the absolute, it's difficult to, I show you, I show you something to explain it's not easy to explain. No, I don't have it. Well, I'm trying to say that, no, it's not, I mean, it's not a problem in the sense that these are three different contexts, but the expectation is that the preference for A over B should change independently or dependently to the presence of a decoy. So it's the preference of on a trait over the other. It's not the overall preference. I don't know if I can if I can answer to Paolo.
I guess so, yeah.
By the way, he's saying that he's
perhaps
making compliments to you, saying that he liked the talk and he's happy to meet you.
Thank you.
He thought you gave a great talk.
I don't know if I answer, it's not easy, but I mean, let's say that you have, that the female spent 10 minutes in total choosing males. What I'm looking at is that, I mean, in the binary, I maybe see that she spent 7 minutes with one and 3 minutes with the other. So the 70% of time with the yellow and the 30% of time with the size. Then also if the time changes, again in the trinary, I'm again measuring the preference for A over B. So I just see if the relative time of preference with one or the other changes. I don't know if I answered. I hope so. I don't see Paolo.
Let me see what he's writing. I'm wondering if we can invite.
Of course, the context is changing, but this is the scope of the experiment.
Yes, he's saying it's clearer now. Mine was just a technical question. How did you manage the difference?
Okay.
Okay, so yeah, he's happy. Great. Anybody else? That's probably a question. Yeah, we have a question here. I guess we can put the question on the screen. I'll start reading it. Which are the putative genes associated with female preference other than the genes related to vision? So do you have hypotheses about other genes or candidate genes?
No, I don't know.
And Ricardo is, Lisa, Ricardo is one of those students I mentioned you about.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't have any genetic study on my species. I mean, I'm not a molecular biologist, I have to say. I would like to expand a bit on that side. I don't have, I still, maybe, I don't know. He has an idea to suggest. I don't know, really. That's a good question. I mean, it's even difficult to demonstrate that the preference is hereditable. It's not easy. So that's not an easy question too, because to do that, you should have, you should have model species that you can rear in captivity through successive generations. And that's not possible with the peacock blenny. So it's difficult even to say that the preference is hereditable in the blenny, in the peacock blenny. I don't know. And I think he's referring to the runaway selection process for the evolution of female choice, but I don't have proof in the peacock blenny. We don't have proof, I mean, so many proof in general on the runaway selection process. So, I mean, the hereditability of the traits and preference and a reinforcing process, we don't have so many examples. So the one I show you in the stickleback, then we have some indirect demonstrations, and then something in, I mean, in lizards, but it's not easy to demonstrate the heritability of the preference and even the genes for the preference. would be nice.
Do you expect any frequency
So-
dependency? Do you expect any frequency dependency in these kind of choices? No, shouldn't though.
No, I don't.
Mm.
But again, I mean, I don't know. The system is complex, so I expect that maybe dependent on the frequency of males in the population. On the size of the
That's
of the
what I was
population.
thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, because
Sometimes they can switch from
I mean,
one selection to the.
I would say that I can imagine that if you have just few males, it's not difficult to sample and get the one that goes over a threshold, and it is the most sexy one. Okay, if you have many males, a fast, quick comparative choice might be much more advantageous in a dynamic context. So who knows? This is maybe the question that also Ale did. So the idea that it depends on how the context changes, and the choice might switch between irrational and rational depending on the context. Who knows? This is something that I would like to test. And the context might be even the density of males.
Yeah, the sex ratio.
But then irrational wouldn't be irrational after all.
No, it's an irrational in the sense, we call it irrational in the sense of the economic rules,
Yes.
so, but it's not irrational. It has an advantage in this kind of situation. So you are much more fast, and you don't have to search for a male that go over a threshold in a complex situation. It would be expensive in time, you would be much more exposed to predators and everything, going around to search and search and search. In this way, you just compare quickly, and so it's advantages. So it's not irrational in the cost and benefits payoff at the end.
Okay, Ale, what do you think?
I have one or two last curiosities. Sorry. First of all, I would like to follow on Riccardo's question about genes briefly. Is your model study well known for genetics, for gene expression studies or not? This is a big issue, because usually no model organism, even if you find genes associated with something, then you have no idea what they're for.
Exactly.
In your model, and you have to go far from your model, and then you end up having a list of genes of interest, candidate genes, but then you have no idea what they're doing apart from the cellular function, which is meaningless for us ethologists, because it's,
I don't have any idea of gene functions in my species. So no. Would be a completely, it's always difficult with wild species, These are not these are not guppies, zebrafish, or that stuff that you have in the lab, and these are wild species, and you have to imagine that for all the experiments that we do in captivity, after the experiment, we bring back the animals to the wild. So they go back. They just make a choice in the lab, and then they go back. So it's a kind of,
and then they change their choice.
Yeah, maybe.
And the last thing is, I was really fascinated by the picture of the nest of the goby, the one on the first slide.
But
you were saying about the function, but just for the nest structure. But does it have, or maybe I miss it, a function in signaling or not? Do females look at the kind of nest, or?
I don't know. You know what? It's much more related on the dynamic of fertilization. They are lagoon species. They live in these areas in which it's not sand, it's sand and mud. It's a kind of soft bottom. And they start digging the nest at the beginning of the breeding season, just underneath the roots of the seagrass, because the roots give stability to the muddy walls of the nest. And then the female goes inside and attaches the eggs to the roots of the seagrass. So it's a kind of closed chamber with all the roots inside, with the female attaching the eggs. And it's a protective nest, protected nest inside which they can perform the parental cares until the end of the season. So for sure it has, I mean, a protection function against predators. I mean, it's almost impossible to have a predator inside there, except for crabs. But they are, I mean, as soon as they enter, I guess they are pushed away. So it's a protected nest. Then, I mean, what I don't know and what we can't know, it's really difficult. We try to make some, I mean, structural measurements of the nest, but it's not easy because they are complex chamber under the mud, and so and dark, completely dark. So you should put cameras, infrared cameras under. It's not easy to get. And then I don't know. What I know is that probably larger males have larger nests because they are better able also to dig the nest in the sand. Okay, so then I don't know if there is a strict female choice for bigger nests in the grass goby. We never measured it. Would be interesting. It's a bit, I mean, a difficult system to measure in nature. You can do experiments in captivity for sure because they breed in captivity really well. It's difficult to measure the choice in nature. Also because you see them when the tide is low. And when the tide is completely low, you walk on the top of the nest and you see the holes. And if you go inside with your arm, you can catch them. But I mean, it's not easy to see what happens when the tide is, well, you can dive, but then they are completely covered with the seagrass. And so you don't see them. You see the holes just when the tide is low, and so the seagrass is completely flat, unless they are completely covered. So it's difficult.
Okay, great. Thanks. There are no more questions. I think we can end this seminar. Alessandro would like to add something.
Yeah,
I
would like
thank
to
Lisa
wrap up.
a lot.
Yeah.
And sorry, and I leave you the stage, Ale.
Yeah, first of all, I want to thank Lisa for this wonderful seminar that was very stimulating, and also the what we could tell about the relevance of the ecology of these, the context in which these behaviors are expressed is very relevant. Of course, for me as an animal ecologist, this is even more important. And so thanks, Lisa. Thanks a lot for your time and effort. And then I would like to introduce to the people that are listening that the next seminar of our seminar series in dialogues on ethology and behavioral ecology will be with Dr. Sergio Pellis on the 6th of May. And he will be talking about play fighting, reciprocity, uncertainty, and the making of a social brain. So that will be a little bit more of cognitive and behavior, but it will be very, very stimulating and interesting as well. So thanks again to Lisa, to Alessandro for inviting, for this very good choice of a speaker. Congratulations to both of you.
Thank you.
Thanks again. And so see everybody next time on May the 6th at 3:30 p.m.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thanks, Alan.
Bye all.
Bye all.